What's up everyone? Welcome back to another video. In the last video, we actually reshaped and polished the upper clamp on this CB550 I'm working on. And I've slowly started working my way down the fork, trying to get everything dialed for this bike. So if you haven't seen that video, make sure you check it out. I'll post it right here. You can go have a look at it. It's a pretty cool process, and you can do it on a lot of CBs or any of the bikes from the 70s. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the front brake caliper. Now the front brake caliper on the CB550 is very similar to the one that's on the 750, so this will probably work on that bike as well. But you can really make these things look awesome. You just strip them down, rebuild them, and polish them, and it makes for a nice front brake caliper. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how I do it, how I rebuild it, some of the things that I do to make it easier to kind of get this piston out. And yeah, let's jump into the video. If this is something that you're interested in, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, because it helps with the algorithm and it pushes these videos out to more people who are similar minded. So let's jump into the video. All right, so first things first, let's say you have a motorcycle that's complete and you're ready to tear it down. The one thing that I would recommend is not to take apart the front brake assembly. So leave the master cylinder connected to the brake line and the brake line connected to the caliper, because it's going to make your life a lot easier to get this piston out, which is the main component on how this brake works. It's a nightmare to get out without any type of oil pressure from the master cylinder pushing it from the back. Now, there are some ways to get it out without it. You know, there's situations where you pick up a bunch of parts and you don't have it connected to anything and the piston's just sitting in there. You can blow it with compressed air, and sometimes that'll work. However, be careful, because it'll just shoot out at you, and whatever oil is left inside of that chamber or the caliper itself will just blow all over your shop. Ask me how I know. This is the assembly off the bike on the lift right now. This is a 1978 CB550K, and as you can see, the master cylinder, the brake line, and the caliper are all still attached to each other. It actually still has the brake pads in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the brake pads out so I can get to that piston. Now from here, I'm going to pull the cap off of the master cylinder right here, and I'm going to just pull the piston right out. But be careful, because there's going to be oil in the back of it. Now you can see all of the grime and the stuff that's kind of built up over the years. You can also see kind of the rust and corrosion. So I have it clamped here in the vise, just very light pressure. You want to make sure that you're using like a smooth jaw or an aluminum jaw, because you don't want to damage the surface of the caliper itself. But while I'm here, I'm actually going to take the brake hose off. And I'm also going to take off this bleeder. Now I have some new hardware for this, so I'm not really concerned about it, but if you're going to reuse it, make sure you save everything. Be very careful with the bleeder, because sometimes I've seen these snap off inside and then you're kind of screwed. So just, if it's seized, maybe add a little bit of heat. Make sure that it doesn't break off inside. You'll have a much bigger problem if you do. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is clean all of the stuff that was inside of the caliper out of here. Luckily, I have a parts washer in the shop. This makes it really convenient, but you can do this with brake clean or acetone or anything that you have to kind of clean out the grease and oil and brake fluid that's on the caliper. You just want to make sure that you get it pretty clean, because the next step's going to require a dry and clean surface. The next thing to do is to get this seal, hopefully you can see it in the camera, to get this flat seal out of there so that we can move on to the next step. Now the way that I usually do it is I have a pick like this that you can kind of get in there if it's still soft and kind of pry it up. You don't want to hurt the surface too much. Okay, so if you can get underneath it like that, then you can just pull it right out. And you can see the seal itself is kind of crusty. The oil and all the crud kind of made it into the seal seat. So we're gonna have to clean all that up in the next step. If you're having problems getting out the crust and the grime that's inside of that seal mating surface, you can also take a Dremel with a little nylon brush and go around it, and that seems to help kind of break up some of the hard stuff that's in there. All right, so now that the inside is pretty much cleaned up and scraped and all of the grime has been removed, I'm gonna actually take this emery cloth, or I don't know where I got this, but I got it from an engine builder who uses it to kind of like just freshen up like cam profile surfaces and just, you know, kind of clean up the surface of things. This doesn't take off much material. I'm assuming it's probably like a 3,000 to 5,000 grit piece of cloth. It's got this weird, you know, backing on it, but I've used this to kind of clean up surfaces in the past. I think it's called emery cloth. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, I just take this and I just kind of run it through the inside profile where the piston sits to kind of like polish that surface a little bit and make sure that it's clean and it has no kind of corrosion that's sticking up and could potentially score the piston. We're ready to start stripping this thing. Now there's a couple different ways that you can do that. You know, paint stripper. I find that paint stripper, especially for some of these older kind of baked on parts that get hot, paint stripper just in California does not work like it used to. So my method and way that I like to do it is with the wire wheel. Now the key to the wire wheel is that you don't want to put so many scratches in this thing. You just want a light touch to knock the paint off, because those scratches that you put into it are something that you're gonna have to sand out eventually to polish it to a mirror finish. As the other side of the caliper is kind of cooling down a little bit, let's look at the back piece of this caliper. Now this doesn't move at all. This is just a stationary pad that the piston pushes up against. The only thing that's holding it on is this little cotter pin right here, and basically you're just gonna pinch the two here together, just like that, and you're gonna pull it through on the other side. Should come right out. Now, always replace your cotter pins. There's no need. They're cheap enough. Go get a new one. You can just bring this in, find the size that you need, and you should be good. Now, the pad just pops off. There's nothing on the back here except for dirt and grime. I'm gonna bring this over to the parts washer, clean it up, and then strip it like we just did the front piece of the caliper. So now that everything's stripped and cleaned and we're down to bare metal, it's time to start sanding this thing to get it ready for polishing. Now you could skip this step and you could paint this caliper and rebuild it and it would be good to go. But for this bike, we're gonna polish it because everything else is polished. And what I need to do first is sand the surface to get it ready for the buffing wheel. Now the goal with sanding is to start at a 400 grit and work your way up to a 1500 grit, so that when the time comes to hit the buffing wheel, there's not much work that needs to be done. It should polish right up. All right, so I've been sanding on this for about an hour, and the finish is up to 1,000 grit sandpaper. I'm gonna see if I can polish it out. It looks pretty smooth and should buff out really well. It just, there's some spots kind of like inside here where the bolts are, and some of these like small crevices that I don't touch. I do polish them so they will shine with the rest of it, but it's more important for me to have these big surfaces be a mirror finish than anything else. So when it comes to buffing, basically there's a couple things that you need to know. First of all, you need to have a bench grinder and polisher that's powerful enough. Some people do it with 3/4 horsepower bench grinders, but those just don't have enough power that when you start to push into it, it'll just stall the thing, and it's really time consuming to use one of those. Now I'm using this, I think it's a 1.5 bench grinder slash polisher, and I have a smaller woven stitched wheel that I'm using. Now there's two compounds that I use. I have this like black compound that's used for hard metals. It's aggressive, and it's used to kind of like remove rust, corrosion, scratches, and burrs. I use this on aluminum, and it really is a great starting point when it comes to you know, a polishing compound, because it really takes away some of the scratches and the things that you didn't sand away. So I start with this black one, and then from there I'll actually move into a loose woven polishing wheel, and I have a little bit left, but this is a green polishing compound that I use to do the final polish. All right, so it's day number 2 in the shop. Yesterday I finished the sanding and the initial polish of the caliper, both the front and rear. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reassemble and put the brand new piston and all the parts that we have here into the caliper. Now, I don't have any brake pads yet. Those are on their way, but I'll kind of show you an example of how I would do it with the older ones. Just know that there's going to be no brake pads in this, so if you're following along step by step, just make sure you put your brake pads in the way that you took them out. All right, so first things first is let's talk about the piston itself. Now, this is a new one from Dime City Cycles. You can get these in many different places, but yeah, make sure you get a new one of these. The old ones, I mean, you could try to save them, but they're probably pitted and have like scarring on the side. But it's easy enough to just buy one. They're cheap, they're not too expensive, and it makes your job a lot easier. The first thing we're going to do is actually install the seal into the inside groove right there, and it's pretty straightforward. These seals are square, so there's only one way they can go in, and you just want to make sure that you seat it inside properly before you put the piston in. Now the key here is just to get one side started and kind of chase it all the way around until it's all sitting in the groove completely straight. Take a little bit of brake fluid, just pour it into the cap, and I'm just going to take my finger and just kind of like wet the actual seal itself. This will make sliding the piston in a lot easier. Piston goes in, hopefully you can see this, but you see this top piece, this is facing out. You just want to put even pressure into it and slide it right in, just like that. Also, at this point, if you did have your brake pad, for instance, here's the old one right here. As you can see, that's pretty grimy. There is a little tiny kind of like nylon bushing that will actually fit onto the backside of the pad, just like that. To hold this in, to make sure that it stays in position, I'll actually put like a dab of grease around the outside here, just a little bit. You don't want to put too much. You don't want that grease getting onto the brake pad, because that's not going to stop the bike any better. But you want to make sure that that little kind of washer is sitting on the outside of the pad right there, and then this would just slide right into the top, and there's nothing really holding it on except for the pin that's right there. It kind of like rides on that pin. So after you have your piston installed, the next thing would be to put your rear brake pad in. Now this one is held in by a cotter pin that goes through the top here. You would just put it in just like this, put the cotter pin in, and then on the back side, make sure that you kind of sprawl that cotter pin out, and it's as simple as that. Now, the one thing about these old CBs is that they have this brake hanger, and it's pretty similar to what's on a CB550. This one's from a 550, obviously, but basically I'm going to set that in the middle just like that, upside down. I have my 2 pads, or my 2 pieces of the caliper. They clamp together, and then I got some new hardware to go with this. You can order these from a lot of the parts websites too. Just get them, they're cheap. There's a washer that goes on. It goes through the front of the caliper, through the brake hanger, and into the back of the caliper. The one thing about polished aluminum is you got to be very careful not to scratch anything. because it is soft, it will scratch, and then you got to start all over again and repolish it. So just be careful when you're dealing with a polished aluminum, especially this stuff. Now next up is going to be the actual the components that mount the caliper to the front fork. O-ring sits right there, and then you're just going to put your grease in there. Just a light coat, you don't need much. And from here, this piece actually goes onto the bottom of the bracket, and it slides directly through. Push it through just like that. There's a O-ring, another O-ring that goes right on top. And then you have the actual 2 bolts, the upper mounting point that just slides right on top. And this swivels around, so there's really no direction. Now the next thing I do at this point is I actually have a new brake hose. I forgot what these are called, but basically this is an OEM Honda one. You just want to use an OEM Honda brake hose because they're perfect. A lot of the Chinese ones or the ones that are made overseas have like weird threads, or you can cross thread this thing and then you're kind of screwed. So this, the way that this works is it just comes over the top just like this, and then obviously screws into the caliper right here. Now I've seen some guys, you can run a direct line, but the one thing with those direct lines is you have a banjo bolt sitting right here, and what's cool about this, the way that it routes the brake line here, is it actually tucks the brake line up behind the fork, and then you don't run into issues of it hitting the tire while the tire is moving. This gets it away and back far enough so that you can hook up your brake line and have no issue at all. Now I'm just going to leave that loose for now because I do want it to swivel, and I want to put it in the position that it needs to be when it's on the bike. Also, while I'm here, I have a new bleeder. Now this is just pretty straightforward, just goes right in. I'm going to throw that on as well. So this is our brake assembly, and it's obviously a little dirty from my fingerprints, but it's ready to go back on the bike. And obviously I'm going to have to take it off again to put the brake pads in, but this is just an example of where you can get to with the stock caliper, making it look pretty and ready to go back on the bike. All right, so one thing I have messed up on when I was showing assembling this is that the hanger, the caliper can be on either side of it. I had to switch it around 180 degrees. Both forks are able to accept a brake. So this one's just a single-sided one, although that fork does have the mounting points for a dual-cylinder setup. Most of the CB550s are going to be a single-sided setup on the left-hand side, I think with the exception of the CB550F, but it's the same fork. You can just switch this hanger around and it can go on both sides. The one thing that I do is on the bolts that are actually bolting this to the fork itself, I put a little bit of blue Loctite just as a safety measure. I don't want these things backing out. If they do, then you don't have a front brake. So there's 3 mounting points. You have the one at the bottom here, which is this big 8mm, and then you have 2 6mm bolts up top. And basically it just bolts directly to it. So the adjustment screws now come as a kit. You have the spring, hopefully you can see that. You have the spring itself, you have the actual bolt, and then you have the nut and the washer. Basically what happens is the bolt goes through the back, and then you have the spring that goes between the two. This then threads into the fork with a flat head. You can just kind of get it in there by hand and start it. You just want to get it so the head of that bolt is kind of flush with the hanger. As you can see, the spring is sitting in between there, and you're going to make the adjustment when you get the actual front wheel on it with the rotor. But from here, it's basically just your washer that goes over it, and then you have your nut that sits right on top. My brake line is still loose, that way I can move it around. And if you actually look at the back here, you see where it comes out. That's where your brake line is going to hook up, and it's a great way to keep the brake line from rubbing the tire when the tire's spinning. All right, so that's it for this video. Hopefully you learned something. I showed you my process of how I restore and rebuild some of these old brake calipers. It's a really easy way to kind of add some character to the bike, especially if you're going to have the part anyways, and it doesn't take much work. I mean, it's a lot of elbow grease and polishing and sanding, but for what it's worth, I mean, it's a great way to restore and make these things look really good on your bike. If you've stuck around towards the end of the video, I really appreciate it. Every second counts when it comes to the YouTube algorithm, and the moment you click off is actually a bad kind of hint towards the algorithm, so it doesn't push the video out more. I really appreciate you guys watching it all the way through. If you're a subscriber here already, thank you. If you're new, please be sure to hit that like and the subscribe button because it really helps with the algorithm. But maybe next time we'll kind of restore the master cylinder. I use the OEM master cylinder on most of these Hondas, and I do kind of the same process where I polish it and restore it, put new seals in it, new pistons, stuff like that. So if you want to see something like that, let me know in the comments. I really enjoy reading everything that you guys put down there. But until next time, see ya.